Hello everybody, a very good morning to you. It is 7 o'clock and you are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Thousands of ambulance workers in England and Wales are on strike for a third time in a dispute over pay. People are being advised only to call 999 if someone is seriously injured or their life is in danger. And Conservative Party Chairman Nadhim Zahawi is fighting to save his job this morning. Sky News has learned that he settled a seven-figure bill with HMRC while he was serving as Chancellor. In a few minutes, we'll speak to the independent tax expert whose investigation could have cost him millions. It's Monday, the 23rd of January. Today's strike will involve thousands of paramedics, control room staff and support workers who are walking out over pay.
Pay us more. We are live on the picket line as paramedics across the northwest start 2 days of strike action.
As much of the country shivers under a blanket of freezing fog, the National Grid implements an emergency plan to pay more than 1 million customers to use less energy and help prevent blackouts.
Senior Conservatives say Nadhim Zahawi must give more information about his tax bill and whether he paid a penalty to HMRC. And questions for Boris Johnson too. Labour report him to the Commons watchdogs over an £800,000 loan allegedly secured with the help of the now BBC chairman. Also ahead, a man suspected of killing 10 people in a Chinese New Year mass shooting in California is found dead. Berlin says it won't stop Poland from sending German-made Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Also ahead, we'll speak to England rugby legend Lawrence Dallaglio about how he's getting disadvantaged kids involved in the game and using it to turn their lives around. And rocking royalty, Ed Sheeran and Elton John are among the stars who could be asked to perform in a special coronation concert at Windsor Castle. Morning, everyone. Thousands of paramedics, call handling staff and support workers are on strike today, and people are being urged only to call 999 in a life-threatening emergency. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has described the walkout as hugely disappointing. Union leaders accuse ministers of failing to make any sincere effort to end the dispute over pay. These are the areas affected by the strike. They include Unison staff in London, Yorkshire, the North West, North East and also the South West. Unite workers in the West Midlands, North West, North East, East Midlands and Wales. And GMB union workers in the West Midlands. Inzamam Rashid is joining us now from a picket line outside North West Ambulance Service in Chorley in Lancashire. Hi, Inzi, good morning. I'm sure it's as freezing cold up there as it is down here in the South East this morning. What are the striking workers saying to you? Good morning.
Got an ambulance coming in the background.
I think they're saying made of tougher stuff up here, Kay, and clearly that's something that many people will need over the next couple of days as North West Ambulance Service. Many of their members will strike over the next couple of days. This morning, a few people out already, as you can see, more expected to turn up, and we'll see how much support that they get from the public. Of course, up to around 15,000 Unison ambulance workers will strike for the third time in 5 weeks, and they'll be joined by 5,000 of their NHS colleagues at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. So the North West will be hit in terms of services when it comes to ambulance services and hospital work as well. Let's bring in a paramedic, Gary Blackburn, who can actually just give us a sense of why this is happening. Why is this so important for you, Gary? Why is it that you're out here early morning striking?
So, I've been a paramedic for 30 years. I'm a representative for Unite also. The health service has over 100,000 vacancies and we can't retain our staff. The latest pay award for some staff is as low as 2.2%, which with inflation being around 10%, is 8% below inflation, and staff cannot afford to live like that. If we can't retain the staff, we can't deliver the service that we need to deliver. And the public, our neighbours, friends, relatives, deserve the better service than we can deliver.
So that is the bottom line. It is more money. You are asking for more money. They currently, the government, say there is not enough in the pot to service you.
We need to save the NHS, and in order to save the NHS, we need to retain the staff that we have in the NHS. And at the moment, we're not able to do that, which means we can't deliver the service that you, my relatives, your neighbours deserve. We know we're not delivering that service at the moment, so we need to change something to make sure that we can.
Can I ask a bit about the disruption? You know, there will be people watching this today in the Northwest in particular and thinking, you know, I couldn't even, you know, get an ambulance to come to me quick enough before. Now there's loads going on strike. It's going to be even more difficult. Is that not a concern for you, that people will be looking at the TV and going, hang on a minute, you know, when can I get an ambulance to me?
Of course, that is a concern, and Unite have worked extremely hard with Northwest Ambulance Service, and Unite has worked with other ambulance trusts to ensure that we've got derogations in place. So we've had many meetings. We've got agreements for what category of patient will receive an ambulance. We've got a commitment that if there is a serious case, that members of the ambulance service on this picket line will leave to go straight to that job. So we do our very best to make sure that the public are not in danger.
Gary, a quick answer.
Yeah.
Are you confident you can get a resolution soon?
I'm confident we have to save the NHS, yes.
That wasn't a yes or no to getting a resolution. Interesting. Let's get a response from Steve Barclay. This is what he said over the weekend. It is hugely disappointing. Some ambulance workers are continuing to take industrial action. I've had constructive talks with unions about this coming year's pay process for 2023, 2024, and I'm keen to continue talking about what is affordable and fair. But clearly, regardless of any discussions or how close they're getting, it's quite clear from these members and Northwest Ambulance Service that over the next couple of days they will continue with their strikes, and there is no doubt, Kay, that there will be disruption ahead for many.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Well, if you want to be part of a special debate on the future of the NHS this week, simply scan this QR code, there you are, which will bring up an email form for you to apply to be part of the audience at University Hospital Coventry. We'll be asking, can the NHS survive? You can also email nhscrisis@sky.uk directly. That's this Thursday, 7 p.m. on Sky News. You want to be part of the audience, you've got a question, let us know. And at 2 p.m, just a few hours before that, Sarah Jane and me will be hosting a phone-in, NHS Your Say. We want to hear your experiences, good or bad, whether it's getting an appointment with your GP, waiting for an ambulance or surgery, or visiting A&E. Call us now, 020 8167 2200, 020 8167 2200, and leave us a message to book your slot. Conservative Party Chairman Nadhim Zahawi is fighting to save his job this morning. Sky News has learned that he settled a 7-figure bill with HMRC while he was serving as Chancellor. Senior Conservatives are calling for Mr Zahawi to give more information about his tax bill and whether he paid a penalty to HMRC. Labour's accused him of spending a week dodging questions. The party chair, Annalise Dodds, said this whole episode is deeply damaging to public trust, with the Chancellor in charge of the nation's finances asking the public to pay their taxes while apparently having failed to do so himself. His position is clearly untenable. Every hour that Rishi Sunak refuses to sack him shows just how weak the Prime Minister is. Well, in a few moments, we'll be speaking to the tax expert Dan Needle, who investigated Mr Zahawi's tax affairs, and find out what he's got to say. That story gets a lot of coverage in the papers this morning. The Daily Mirror pictures Nadhim Zahawi, Rishi Sunak and Mr Johnson with the headline, "They still don't get it." The Metro leads with the questions surrounding the BBC chair Richard Sharp's alleged involvement in Boris Johnson's personal finances before Mr Johnson recommended him for the role. Both men deny any wrongdoing. While the Daily Express focuses on Boris Johnson making a surprise visit to Ukraine, the Eye says energy companies will respond to the government considering a ban on the forcible installation of prepayment meters in people's homes by increasing prices. The Telegraph says the National Grid is getting ready to pay people to use less energy as the country faces days of cold weather. So more than 1 million households are going to be paid to use less electricity today as part of an emergency plan to prevent power cuts during the cold weather. What's all this about? Are we close to blackouts? Matthew has more for us. What's the plan, Matthew?
Well, as you say, Kay, for the very first time, the National Grid is going to implement an emergency scheme to try and save as much energy as possible and prevent the lights going out. It's because the UK is facing, as you may know, if you look outside your window, an extraordinary freeze at the moment. Certainly London woke up to a blanket of freezing fog this morning. There's a light dusting of frost here on Westminster Bridge, and that's going to create a spike in demand for energy. Wind power is generating less than it usually does at this time of year, so there are some concerns that there will be a shortage of supply. The National Grid therefore activates something called the Demand Flexibility Service, which will essentially pay around 1 million energy customers in the country. Only those who have smart meters, only those who are subscribed to the 26 or so energy companies who've signed up to this scheme. But they will be paid, essentially, to use less energy than they otherwise would. It's happening between 5 and 6 p.m. this evening. It's not asking people to sit in the dark or sit in the cold. It's more a question of using appliances, particularly energy-intensive appliances, differently. So you might cook your dinner in the oven slightly later. You might put the washing on at a slightly different time, and these million or so customers will be paid between £3 and £6 per unit of energy that they don't use that they otherwise might have used. And the National Grid has tested this on at least 2 occasions. They say their testing shows that it does actually reduce consumer demand for energy, so this is why they're bringing it in today. They've also, as a precautionary measure, asked 2 coal-fired power units at Drax Station in North Yorkshire and another one in Nottinghamshire to warm up and be ready to generate electricity just in case. But a spokesperson for the National Grid and indeed the government this morning, both stressing people shouldn't be worried. This is not necessarily a question of the lights going out. It's more, in the words of the National Grid spokesman, a precautionary measure to ensure that there's sufficient spare capacity in the system. So it's not a question necessarily, they say, of rolling blackouts. It's more a question of taking precautions and making sure that there's enough energy to go around.
Matthew, a lot of people watching this morning will be thinking, I need to make the kids tea at that time tonight. How can I possibly not be using energy?
Well, it's a question of perhaps using energy slightly more efficiently. So you might, for example, I suppose, put your tea in the microwave as opposed to the oven because the oven uses more energy. Or it might be a question of delaying it slightly, or, as I say, not putting your washing on between 5 and 6, or doing whatever you can to adjust your usage of energy. Not everyone has to do it. It's not a requirement. It's just you can do so in the knowledge that if you do use less energy between those key hours of 5 and 6 p.m, you will be compensated for it. Again, if you're one of those million customers who has a smart meter and is one of the 26 energy companies that signed up to this scheme, and as I say, you'll be paid somewhere between £3 and £6 per unit of energy that you don't use. So you can choose to avail yourself of that option if you wish, but if you've got to get the kids' dinner on, then no one's saying that you can't do that this evening.
OK, thank you. Freezing out there this morning, and that's what's putting pressure on the National Grid. We will be speaking to the National Grid at 9:20 this morning. Meantime, Steph's standing by for us. It was freezing this morning coming in. It's going to get even colder.
It is bitterly cold. In fact, Heathrow was showing -8 degrees. That is super cold. And as well as that, we're also now seeing some fog. This is actually the time we're most likely to see the fog appear. You can see behind me rather a pretty sunrise. And that sun just injects that little bit of movement in the air and also starts to melt some of the ice. And that injection of moisture is what triggers a fair amount of fog to form at this time specifically. So it might not have been foggy where you are about half an hour ago, but it might be now. So don't count your chickens before you check out the window. As well as seeing a fair amount of fog, also for the same reasons that we're seeing the fog, we're also seeing a fair amount of air pollution as well. So we've got very light winds. We've also got the atmosphere sort of trapping all the pollutants by the ground. So we are seeing a fair amount of air pollution, particularly by roads at the moment. But let's have a look at the full forecast and see what's going to happen with the weather over the next few days.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there. Well, we've got lots of sunshine down in southern parts of England and also the southern parts of Wales. And further north, there's more in the way of cloud and it's rather murky. But for many parts of Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, that's where we've already got the mild air. So at the moment, the temperatures are above freezing by a long way, 7 or 8 degrees. But down in the southeast, we're below freezing, some places -7 or 8. It's the brighter weather in the south that'll hold out during the day today, but stay bitterly cold. In the north, staying mild, but with some showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A man suspected of killing 10 people in a mass shooting at a Chinese New Year celebration in California has been found dead in the driver's seat of a van. Police named the suspect as 72-year-old Hu Can Tran and said he'd shot and killed himself as officers closed in on him. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
A suspect surrounded 30 miles from the ballroom dance hall where the massacre happened. Inside the white van was this man, 72-year-old Hu Can Tran, alleged to have shot dead 10 people and injured scores more. His body found slumped in the driver's seat, but troubling questions remain.
What was the motive for this shooter? Did he have a mental illness? Was he a domestic violence abuser? How did he get these guns? And was it through legal means or not?
It had been a Saturday of celebration here. This was the eve of Chinese New Year in a predominantly Asian American city. But after night fell as a ballroom dance class took place, the gunman opened fire. He then went to another dance venue in the nearby city of Alhambra. The killing spree would probably have continued, but he was disarmed by 2 people. This quiet community rocked by violence.
It really is really sad. I was looking forward to be here celebrating, but even if I'm not celebrating, I'm part with them. So I wanted to be here and tell the Asian community that they're very special to me.
It is the deadliest shooting in California in recent memory.
This was supposed to be day 2 of the Chinese New Year celebrations, but they're taking down the signs and dismantling the stalls because Monterey Park is now the focus of America's gun violence epidemic.
Another mass shooting means another chorus of calls for gun control legislation.
It's difficult for a lot of people to understand that an individual can get hold of such a powerful weapon that can kill 10 people.
Yes, of course. 10 people, they only have one 30-round magazine. Put on the weapon, they can kill many people. Gun is a danger. Gun only for the people professional, like law enforcement, or they need that. But not why you need the gun.
This land needs you, Father.
Local people gathered to pray. The immediate danger may have passed here, but gun violence is the never-ending scourge of life in this country. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Monterey Park.
Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, convicted sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell has claimed a photograph showing Prince Andrew with his arm around the then 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre is fake. Speaking in a video interview from inside prison, Maxwell claimed there is no photograph, adding that she'd only ever seen a photocopy of it. Ms Giuffre used the picture to support her allegations against the prince in a case that was settled outside of court. Ms Maxwell had previously said that the photograph was genuine. Hundreds of mourners have attended a memorial for Lisa Marie Presley at Graceland in Tennessee following her death 11 days ago. Her mother, Priscilla, paid an emotional tribute, saying, "Our heart is broken," as she read a poem by her granddaughter. Damar Hamlin received a standing ovation from fans when he appeared on the big screens at the Buffalo Bills and Cincinnati Bengals NFL game. The American football star was attending the game less than 3 weeks after he suffered a cardiac arrest while playing for the Bills. Still to come on the programme for you, with thousands of ambulance workers staging a fresh day of strike, speaking to the boss of the Unite union, that's Sharon Graham. Labour's Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds will be with me soon after 8 o'clock. And with the SNP calling on the PM to sack Nadhim Zahawi over his tax affairs, speak to the party's leader in Westminster, that's Stephen Flynn. Tory party chair facing further questions over his financial affairs after it emerged he settled a dispute with tax authorities while he was Chancellor. On Saturday, Nadhim Zahawi said that he'd pay the HMRC a sum linked to what he called a careless error. Joined now by the Labour-supporting tax expert Dan Needle, who investigated Mr Zahawi's affairs. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning.
No problem. So can I just, on the Labour-supporting thing, I advise politicians of all four main parties, and I've annoyed politicians of all four main parties. Our work is non-partisan, and most people respect that.
But what about you? Do you support the Labour Party? You're not a Labour Party member, no?
Personally, I support the Labour Party, but I keep my tax analysis and my legal work separate from my private political views, always have done.
OK. Why did Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs first come to your attention?
So back in July, there was a report in some of the press that the NCA, the SFO and HMRC had investigated his tax. He denied it, but then you wouldn't necessarily know if you're being investigated. So I started looking, and I saw something very odd in the way that his original founder's shares in YouGov were structured. And from that, I concluded it looked like he had not paid about 3.7 million in tax. He denied that. He not only did he deny it, he threatened to sue me and other newspapers looking at it. And the whole thing went really rather quiet until it was revealed just a week and a day ago that at the same time he was denying it and sending threatening letters to people, he'd actually fessed up to HMRC that he did owe the tax and he paid it plus penalties.
When Mr Zahawi spoke to me on the 11th of July last year, when he was hoping to be the next Prime Minister during the leadership battle for number 10, he said neither he nor his wife had benefited from any offshore funds.
Yeah,
why do you say that he has?
So I saw that and my jaw dropped because there was clear evidence in a YouGov disclosure from 2005 that we just have it by some corporate quirk. We see this, that he benefited because he received £99,000 from Bolshoi Investments held by the trust. That's not my supposition or a guess, absolute fact. And yet he denied that to you. I said to his lawyers, why is he saying this to Kay Burley when the evidence says it's not true? And they wouldn't reply.
How much do you calculate? Go on, sorry, go on.
Sorry. So that was 99,000. If you receive 99,000 and we just discover it by luck, it's fair to infer there've been other payments. And now, if he was, as reports suggest, actually taxed and paid 3.7 million, I'm guessing on about 27 million of income and gains he didn't declare, then that suggests he received a lot of money, millions of pounds, from the trust, and he told you he didn't benefit at all.
Do we know for a fact, though, that he has received more than the £99,000, which you say there is a paper trail for? Do we know that he's received other money?
We don't know how he received it, but if he was taxed £3.7 million plus penalties and didn't receive any money, and that's a huge injustice, and I'm behind him 100%, I'm guessing he would have said so. You're not generally taxed on money that you don't get.
How much do you calculate that he has, because we don't know, how much do you calculate that he has paid to HMRC?
Well, we don't know, but the leaks suggested a figure of 3.7 million plus interest and penalties, and that is so close to the figure that I estimated that it makes me think that my original supposition back in July was correct.
So how much money do you think he's received?
I think he will have received about £27 million and not paid tax on it. until eventually he was forced to because it was being reported, didn't admit it, denied it, threatened to sue people, and went to HMRC to quietly settle it.
He said that HMRC has accepted that he made a mistake and his error was careless and not deliberate. Why is that not the end of the matter?
Well, to say it's not deliberate as if it's a triumphant result is a bit funny. If it was deliberate, he'd be arrested for criminal tax evasion. Careless means something specific. Careless means that you didn't behave in a reasonable way. A reasonable way is you instruct decent tax advisors, you tell them the truth, you follow their advice, you check your final tax returns best you can. If you do those things, then even if it turns out the tax was wrong, even if your tax advisors were total clowns, you're not careless. So if you're careless, it often means you didn't get advice at all. In his case, that would mean he could have received the money, £27 million perhaps, not taken advice and not paid tax. If that is what happened, that's a huge deal.
How will we find out?
Well, we have no way to find out because HMRC quite rightly have a duty of confidentiality. However, if Mr. Zahawi thinks he needs to continue to be a senior politician, he owes us an honest answer. He needs to explain exactly what happened, explain exactly why he didn't pay the tax, and most importantly, explain why he told me, told you in that interview, told pretty much everyone that his tax affairs were hunky-dory at the same time that he knew they weren't.
Are you suggesting that he intentionally avoided tax?
No, if he'd intentionally avoided tax, then that would be criminal tax evasion, and he would have been dishonest. I can't read his mind. He says, and I have no reason to disbelieve him, HMRC concluded that he was careless, not deliberate. But I am suggesting he deliberately didn't tell me and you and everyone else that there was a problem with his tax affairs when he knew there was. And I'm also suggesting that he told you he had no interest in the trust when he must have done.
A non-deliberate error, not set up an offshore structure to avoid tax, is what the HMRC has accepted. He hasn't broken the law. He has paid any outstanding monies with a 30% penalty or thereabouts. I suppose a lot of people watching this morning would say, surely, you know, he's put his hands up, he made a mistake, he's paid the money he needed to, that's it.
Well, we all make mistakes. I mean, I lost a pen yesterday. I have no idea where it was. I felt ridiculous. I was using it. A mistake where you don't declare £27 million. If we accept everything he says and that wasn't intentional, that's an amazing mistake to make. And you've got to question whether someone who makes that mistake is suitable for public life. For me, though, that's less important than the quite deliberate fact that he, when he knew there was something wrong with his tax affairs, sent lawyers after me and others trying to report on it and told you that he had no interest in a trust, which he surely did. And then, Zoe, we should come to the bit that you mentioned earlier that I haven't picked up. Best of all, worst of all, he went to HMRC to negotiate a settlement when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer.
So what do you want to happen?
It could be there's an innocent explanation for this, which makes perfect sense. I lack the imagination to see it. And if there isn't one, I think he should resign.
I noticed a tweet that you I think it was yesterday, you say that Mr. Zahawi's lawyers have written to you denying that HMRC investigated him under COP 9, the procedure for investigating fraud. Just explain that to me.
Well, I was interested in his statement. He said they concluded it wasn't deliberate, it was a mistake, which suggested perhaps they thought at one point it was deliberate. So I asked him, did it start out as a fraud investigation? And he said no.
OK. I've seen a note from Mr. Zahawi's lawyers responding to you saying that Mr. Zahawi's not being investigated for fraud, so his tax repayment was not being blown out of proportion since it's not being considered currently as anything criminal. Is that reasonable to say?
If everything he says is true, then yes, it wasn't criminal. It was a careless mistake, but I think we want higher standards from our politicians than not being criminal, don't we?
We seem to be at somewhat of a standoff, though, don't we? Because you want him to come clean and basically to resign because you feel that when he was Chancellor, you can't have any investigation by HMRC, even though you said that he probably didn't know initially that his tax affairs were being investigated while you're Chancellor. So what would be
Kay,
gained?
how do you feel, Kay, that you asked him a direct question and he gave you an answer which is absolutely false when it comes to the £99,000, and he knew that, and which is almost certainly false given he's paying the tax? Have you had a politician give you an answer which we know was false? Has that happened before?
Many times.
I'm crushingly naive. I was shocked.
Many times, but you know, you're telling me that he was being economical with the actuality when he was speaking to me. You say that you've got this figure of £99,000, and you can then leap and surmise that potentially he benefited in the form of £27 million. But what I'm saying is, if you found the 99,000, why can you not find the rest?
Oh, the only way we find the 99,000 is there was accidentally an unlawful loan made to the directors. It's a mistake. It happens all the time. And that was repaid via a gift. And because it had been an unlawful loan, the way it was repaid is disclosed in some 2005 documents. It's a complete fluke. We can find that out. Normally, we'd have no way to see the gifts.
You want him to resign because you feel that he hasn't behaved appropriately while in public office.
He threatened to sue me for reporting on something which he denied and turns out to be true. I don't think politicians should do that.
What's going to happen next?
Well, I expect people will keep asking him to come clean, and he will either come clean and provide a satisfactory explanation, and I will eat my collection of hats, or he won't come clean and will have to resign.
And the £99,000, which is the only figures that you can find at the moment, we don't even know how much he's paid to HMRC, or if indeed he has. But he says that he's paid some. We don't know if that includes a fine or not.
Oh, we do, because he admits being careless, which absolutely means there was a penalty. The word careless has a particular tax meaning.
OK. I didn't understand that. Thank you for explaining that. You will continue on with this, though, will you, until you try to uncover more funds or have to eat those hats?
I will. I prefer doing nerdy tax policy that hardly anyone reads, but I'm not going to let this drop.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Pay your money, takes your choice. With many of you waking up to sub-zero temperatures this morning, let's look at some of the best pictures from around the UK. This was Kilcham Castle on the banks of the partially frozen Loch Orr, Argyll and Bute, a few miles north. And this was the scene of snow-covered peaks in Glencoe. In London's Bushy Park, a pair of swans were pictured flying over a frozen pond. Looks to me like they were trying to land and then thought more of it. And one of them landed for a closer inspection. There you go, you see. And it was frozen underfoot for walkers on the grounds of the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. If you want to send us any of your cold weather pictures, you can do so on Twitter at Kay Burley. Still to come on the programme for you, former commander of the Joint Forces Command, General Sir Richard Barrons, joins us on the programme. That to come. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the breakfast show here on Sky News. Pressure mounting on the Tory party chairman, Nadhim Zahawi, after it emerged he settled a dispute with the tax authorities while he was Chancellor. A short while ago, I spoke to tax expert Dan Needle, who investigated the Conservative Party chairman financial affairs. He gave an estimate of how much he believes Mr Zahawi received without initially paying tax, and told me the former Chancellor's description of what happened as careless, not deliberate, is telling.
I think he will have received about £27 million and not paid tax on it. Until eventually he was forced to because it was being reported, didn't admit it, denied it, threatened to sue people and went to HMRC to quietly settle it.
He said that HMRC has accepted that he made a mistake and his error was careless and not deliberate. Why is that not the end of the matter?
Well, to say it's not deliberate as if it's a triumphant result is a bit funny. If it was deliberate, he'd be arrested for criminal tax evasion. Careless means something specific. Careless means that you didn't behave in a reasonable way. A reasonable way is you instruct decent tax advisors, you tell them the truth, you follow their advice, you check your final tax returns best you can. If you do those things, then even if it turns out the tax was wrong, even if your tax advisors were total clowns, you're not careless. So if you're careless, it often means you didn't get advice at all. In his case, that would mean he could have received the money, £27 million perhaps, not taken advice, and not paid tax. If that is what happened, that's a huge deal.
Amanda, good morning.
Good morning.
Where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's very clear from that interview with Dan Needle there how many huge unanswered questions there still are around Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs. What exactly happened? Why the explanations that were given, the amount of the settlement, the amount of the penalty.
For him to save his job?
I mean, I think he needs to, as Ian Duncan-Smith indeed yesterday was saying, he needs to come clean and set everything out in the open, because I think at the moment it is still very murky and unclear. And I think the real question this morning is for Rishi Sunak. Is he going to stand by the chair of the party, or is he going to force him to resign? Labour's Angela Rayner has just tweeted, every hour Rishi Sunak refuses to sack him shows how weak he is. And I think that really will sting. Now, of course, as we've heard there, Nadhim Zahawi says he was careless, that it wasn't a deliberate decision not to pay these really huge sums of tax that ended up being owed while he was the Chancellor. But this is really bad optics for Rishi Sunak. He's a Prime Minister that came to power really not very long ago, promising to clear up politics, to run a government of professionalism, accountability and integrity. And of course, any questions around offshore trusts and payments of tax, remind everyone about the issues he had with his wife's own non-dom status. It's already a big attack line for Labour. I think many in the party will be wondering whether it's really worth it to continue this ongoing discussion, this focus on Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs at a time when they want to be talking about the NHS, trying to get onto the front foot after what was a very difficult week last week, which ended up with the Prime Minister being fined for not wearing a seatbelt, and particularly at a time where they're also mired in another scandal over the weekend, this time about his predecessor, Boris Johnson, and about a loan guarantee that was agreed that was reportedly arranged by a man called Richard Sharp, who a few weeks later went on to become chair of the BBC on Boris Johnson's recommendation. Now, he's denied it's a conflict of interest. Boris Johnson's spokesperson has said it's all rubbish. The Cabinet Office say the correct process was followed. And of course, this did happen before Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. But all of this adds to a sense of a sort of miasma of sleaze around this government, particularly as Mr Sharp himself was Rishi Sunak's boss before when he worked at Goldman Sachs as well. And I think for the public out there struggling with the cost of living crisis, this sense of a government which is above the rules and not playing by them is really going to hurt.
OK, Amanda, for now, thanks very much indeed. So Boris Johnson there in Ukraine over the weekend, surprise visit. Actually, we can tell you the city of Bakhmut in the east of the country has been the focus of intense fighting. For many months, Ukrainian troops have been holding off determined Russian advances, but suspect that Moscow is now preparing for a huge offensive. In a moment, we'll speak to former British Army Commander General Sir Richard Barrons. But first, our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, has spent time with soldiers defending the city and sent this special report.
As shells rain down, Russia's advance on Bakhmut is choking the routes into the city at the epicenter of this war. We travelled on one of the remaining roads in. It is a sketchy, nervous journey along smashed-up streets. Everywhere here is in the line of fire. And the casualties on both sides have been staggering. It's clear this grueling fight is morphing into urban combat. Inside the city, Ukrainian forces are making fortifications. Lines of Soviet-era tanks and armoured vehicles are concealed amongst the buildings.
Пока держимся. Горой стоим против танков с автомата. Там будет видно. Сколько духа хватит, столько и будем стоять.
This city has become a symbolic prize for Russia, although it appears to be of small strategic value.
It's pretty much deserted around here at the moment. There are a few civilians over there, a man collecting wood, but most of these apartment blocks have been damaged by shelling and people have left the city. It's very unnerving just being here, but the fighting now is very, very close.
There are still a few remaining people who are trying to salvage their belongings. Those remaining are terrified, but don't know where else to go.
Люди уехали в Днепр, там уже обстреляли, там уже погибли люди.
Работы невозможно тоже найти.
Они там спрятались, там прилет был и погибли люди. А куда уезжать? По всей Украине прилетает.
Ukrainian soldiers told us Russian forces are now on the edge of the city. And they say they desperately need more modern weapons if they're to stop Vladimir Putin's army in its tracks.
We need weapons today because after tomorrow this city can be destroyed already. And if we will be wait, I can die. But I want to live and I want to support my country. If you wait, maybe Russian will be in Poland tomorrow. We can wait 1 month, 1 year, I don't know how many time. But if we can't stop Russian now, your army must stop Russian tomorrow.
Bakhmut is preparing for another massive Russian offensive. The soldiers here hope they can resist, but after the loss of the nearby town of Soledar, they expect another relentless fight. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Bakhmut.
Well, joining us now is former commander of the Joint Forces Commands, that's General Sir Richard Barrons. Hello to you. Sir Richard, thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Why won't the Germans allow Leopard 2 tanks to be licensed for use in Ukraine?
Well, it's obviously been a very difficult conversation in Germany, partly historical legacy and partly, I think, because of Germans' trade and energy reliance on Russia. But the effect of the delay in Germany of agreeing to send their own tanks and letting other people who have bought German tanks send theirs means that they are now handicapping the Ukrainian prospects for stopping the Russian offensive they know there's coming and mounting their own in 2023.
Although they could, I suppose, look further west and point out that the US is not sending their Abrams tanks.
Yes, they could. There are some genuine military logistic reasons for not sending Abrams. It's a very complex machine. It's quite hard to maintain, and it generally runs off aviation fuel, not diesel. So it would mean Ukraine having a very complex supply line, and the Americans have set that out. We should remember the US have sent more than $50 billion worth of military support, so they are well ahead of anybody else in supporting Ukraine.
Excuse me. Is it not something to do with a close ally of Putin warning that deliveries of Western weapons, including tanks, to Ukraine will lead to a global catastrophe?
So the Russians have
Oh, I think we may have just lost you there, Sir Richard. I don't think you're on mute, are you? No. OK, we seem to have a problem hearing you just at the moment, Sir Richard. I'm so sorry about this. We'll sort that out and come back to you momentarily. I do beg your pardon. My apologies, not sure what's going on there. Those gremlins first thing Monday morning, I'm going to blame it on the cold. Coming up in just a few moments' time, we're going to be talking in more detail about the ambulance strike. It was -6 this morning when I came into work. Ambulance workers are on strike in those freezing conditions this morning. We heard from Inzi, who was up on a picket line in the northwest in Chorley in Lancashire this morning. Another series of considerable strikes for the ambulance unions, and we'll be speaking to their leader in just a few moments' time. Meantime, some of today's other headlines for you. Energy bills Could be hundreds of pounds lower than previously thought in the second half of this year. Analysis by Cornwall Insight found that the average household's energy bill could be £2,200 a year from July. That's around £300 less than predicted. Ambulances with dimmable lights and specially trained paramedics will form part of a £150 million investment in mental health services. The government set out plans for 150 new specialist facilities and up to 100 new specialist mental health ambulances to be put into service over the next 2 years. The head of the CBI will today say that the UK is lagging behind on growth. In a speech at University College London, Tony Danker is expected to call on Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to take big decisions to boost the economy. He'll urge the government to reform the consent process for green infrastructure and use regulation to stimulate domestic demand for green technologies. As I was saying, thousands of ambulance workers in England and Wales are staging a fresh day of strikes today in their ongoing dispute over pay and staffing. They want double-digit wage increases to help keep up with inflation, but the government says that is unaffordable. Joined now by the General Secretary of the Unite Union, Sharon Graham. Hi, Ms Graham, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us. Your members on the picket lines again this morning. How are they feeling?
Well, look, Kay, they're feeling very, very disappointed. It's been 5 weeks since Unite ambulance workers were out on strike, and we believed what the government said, that they were serious about resolution. And in that 5 weeks, there has been absolutely no offer been put on the table. Rishi Sunak is missing in action. It's very, very clear that he now needs to come to the table as the CEO of UK PLC, come to the table and deal with this dispute.
Last week, I think it was last Friday, you said the government is demonising, your words, ambulance workers about life and limb cover. What were you referring to there?
Well, unfortunately, ministers, and I'm going to use the word lie, ministers have lied continuously about ambulance workers not doing life and limb cover. That is totally and utterly untrue. I was on the picket line in the West Midlands and there was life and limb cover. People were coming off the picket line to give extra support in relation to that. And there's something when ministers are beginning to lie in the middle of a dispute. And so therefore what I want them to do, and I want Rishi Sunak now to come to the table, it's very clear, Kay, that Stephen Barclay does not have any authority. He doesn't have the authority to do the deal. There hasn't even been one single offer in 5 weeks. So we now need Rishi Sunak to take this seriously. This is the NHS. Get round the table, let's do the deal and let these people go back to work.
Has there been any communication with the Prime Minister, either by you or other representatives of the NHS unions?
The Prime Minister has absolutely not spoken to us about this in any way, shape or form. To be honest with you, I haven't seen him very often in the last 5 weeks anywhere, apart from in the back of a car not wearing a seatbelt. What he needs to do now is he needs to come to the table and do the deal that we need to do to get these people back to work. This is his responsibility. This is the biggest abdication of leadership that I have seen in negotiations ever in 30 years of negotiating. He needs to do the job he's paid for, get round the table so these people now can get back to work.
You've called for the abolition of the NHS pay review body, I believe. The government would say that's an independent pay review body that helps decide how much money is available for the round of pay for NHS workers. Why do you want it abolished?
Well, look, I think the problem, Kay, with this, and I think it's probably well noted now, is that it isn't independent. That is really part of the problem. But also the scoping around it, the government really gives it such a steer that it can't really come out of that straitjacket. And the government picks and chooses. In 2014, it didn't accept the pay review body's recommendations. In 2018, we're negotiating with the government on salary spines. So it really is picking and choosing how it uses it. What we should do is what happens in every other negotiation. I'm the leader of the biggest private sector union. The private sector wouldn't operate like this. If there's negotiations of this calibre, the CEO would be in a room with me, would be negotiating and would put a deal back to the members. That's what the government needs to do. Now, either Rishi Sunak is not up to the job and he doesn't know how to negotiate, or there is something more sinister going on here. So I'm calling him to come to the table, sit down with the General Secretaries, let's get a deal on the table and then we can give that deal back to our members to vote on.
I think it's fair to say that it's becoming very clear that the government is unlikely to budge on a pay deal this year. You're only 2 or 3 months away from next year's negotiations. By that, I mean April 2023. Is now the time to put a pin in this and start negotiating a better deal for next year?
Well, that would mean that these workers didn't get a pay rise for 22 and 23. And to be honest with you, we cannot allow that to happen. You know, it sounds like white noise, but these were the people that were put out there in the pandemic when we didn't have a vaccine. Nobody knew what was going to go on. People were dying. NHS workers died. And I think it's a national disgrace. An absolute national disgrace that we are not giving these workers a proper pay rise. So we are going to be here until the government comes to its senses and decides to talk about 22 and 23. They need to come back to the negotiating table and put an offer in. They've been around your studio, Kay, saying they're in constructive talks and they are talking about offers. We've had no offer, and unfortunately I can't put the words constructive talks on a ballot paper. I need to have a deal that I can put back to the members so that they can then ballot and everybody can go back to work.
What does increased industrial action look like, though? Because obviously what you're doing at the moment is not making the government budge at all. What more can you do?
Well, I suppose the 6th of February is, quite a sad day for the NHS. This is obviously a day when you're going to have paramedics, NHS workers across the piece, nurses, all coming out together, which is the first time that that's happened. We've tried to sort of make the strikes happen where we don't come out all at the same time so that that's better for the service. Now, what I would hope is that the government, at the very least, if they're not listening to the NHS workers, at the very least listen to the public. The surveys are clearly showing that the public, who, by the way, are their voters, want them to sort this out, and they agree that they should get a pay rise. So if Rishi Sunak decides to ignore the public, then I think that will cost him badly at the ballot box. What they need to do now is to listen to the public, listen to the workforce, come round the table, do a negotiation that we can put back to our members. We are compromising. They can hear that in terms of what we're saying. Come to the table and let's see if we can get a deal.
If lives are lost on the 6th of February when ambulance workers, emergency call handlers and nurses all come out on strike on the same day, who will be responsible for that?
Well, look, the first thing I'd say, the government fairly and squarely, but the first thing I would say is I really hope the 6th of February does not happen. There's a lot of days between now and the 6th of February. The government has an opportunity any time they want to bring the General Secretaries in a room. We will all be there at a drop of the hat. We'll cancel and we'll clear all diaries to do it. But even on the 6th of February, we are going to make sure that we have life and limb cover. But I would say this, Kay, because it's an important figure. 500 people are dying every single week waiting for an ambulance in the 5th richest economy in the world. That is an absolute national disgrace.
It's not helping, though, is it, when your members go out on strike?
But I suppose what we would say to that, Kay, is what else have we got to do? We're trying to talk to them. We're trying to bring them around a table. We're trying to say, come and negotiate. We're doing everything we can to get them to come to the table, and they're absolutely refusing. But I have to say, this is about pay. Of course it is. Absolutely about pay. But it's also about the very existence of the NHS. How could we have a situation on a normal day when no strike is taking place whatsoever, that 500 people are dying in Britain every week waiting for an ambulance? That is unbelievable that is happening in our country. So we have to put a stake in the ground. We have to defend the NHS, and the public want us to do that also.
OK, we must leave it there. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. Do keep us in touch with any movement on these continuing strikes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, we're going to be talking about that in more detail with Labour's shadow minister, asking him, the business secretary, of course, Jonathan Reynolds, asking him how Labour, if they were in power, would resolve the continuing strikes, not only by the ambulance service, but other NHS unions as well. That coming up in just a few moments' time. Do stay tuned on.